Welcome to Hope Through the Hard Stuff, a podcast from Winning at Home. Please welcome your host, speaker, and award-winning author, Steve Norman.
I'm honored today to welcome as our guest, Brad Griffin. He's a senior director of content for the Fuller Youth Institute. He's also the co-author of over a dozen books. He's been an encouragement to me, both directly and indirectly. Brad, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Brad, how many children in your house?
We have three,
Okay.
and they are 13, 16, and 19. So we're calling this our golden year of parenting.
That's amazing. Amazing. Boys, girls, what's the mix?
The oldest is a girl and is in her second year of college.
Okay.
First year on campus. The second is a girl, junior in high school, and then my son is an eighth grader.
Amazing. So you really do have people in all of these different respective critical turning point seasons.
Yeah, it is really fun, and we have to constantly stay on our game.
I can only imagine. Brad, for people who don't have any context, explain a little bit, what is the Fuller Youth Institute? Who are you? What do you do?
We are a research and resourcing organization out of Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, which is where I live in California. And we equip diverse leaders and parents so faithful young people can change our world. So our whole mission really is around helping adults who have teenagers in their lives. And we want to help families do what they want to do, which is love and care for and support their kids. And teenagers are a mystery to most of us. So we kind of get to nerd out on the research side, but also really think about the family side and the pastoral and ministry side of all of it. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Brad, there are some people who would say like, hey, kids are kids. They've been kids for a long time. Why does context specific, time sensitive research matter? Teenagers
are all different. And teenagers are also alike in a lot of ways. Okay. And, what was interesting to us as people who kind of track with teenagers over time is we felt like we were starting to hear adults talk about teenagers today in ways that were kind of left over from the ways we talked about the millennial cohort and this new cohort of teenagers, or Gen Z. While there's certainly been some writing and speculation and whatever about them, we still felt like, especially from a faith perspective, we needed to just spend time listening to real teenagers and also get in there and look at some of the research. And, we feel like this particular cohort is one of the most anxious and adaptive and diverse cohorts of teenagers in US history. And I mean, we can unpack some of that more, but those are the words that kind of come to the surface for us as we began to look at both what's out there about this generation and also what we heard from actual teenagers.
That's great. Brad, a lot of parents that I'm running with these days, they sense the fact that the ground is shifting underneath them, that the world is evolving rapidly, and they just don't know that we have that the tools that many of us have in our kit don't seem to be a comprehensive set of tools that are helping us navigate every question. Tell us a little bit about the research behind the most recent book and why you're excited about the resource it provides.
Yeah. This research really began, a decade and a half ago as we started to look at this question of why young people leave church and what happens to those who stay connected with God, faith, and the church across the transition into adulthood. And that was the genesis of our sticky faith work, which really explored that question. And then we took that kind of to the systemic level as we really studied churches and what is going right in churches who engage young people well, which was another kind of big project we call Growing Young. This project comes out of both of those, and it really looks at three core questions that every teenager is wrestling with. The question of who am I, question of identity, of where do I fit, the question of belonging, and what difference can I make, the question of purpose. And we really wanted to dig into those because we believe that if we can understand those questions, that we can unlock a generation, but we can also unlock the mystery of the specific teenager in front of us. You know, like those three teenagers living in my home, in my family. The more I think through the lenses of identity, belonging, and purpose, the more I can understand the other questions that they're wrestling with. So that's really, you know, what led us to kind of drill in on these questions was this conviction that all the research seemed to be pointing us towards these three questions as the big questions that live underneath the rest.
I'm so grateful for this verbiage, because I think that for many of us as parents, the temptation in the early years is just to keep them functional, right? Like we want to keep, you know, when
Survival.
you bring exactly, you bring a newborn home for the very first time, and all you can think is like, do I have every safety device that money can buy that kind of keeps them protected? And then I think that sometimes the temptation, especially in certain demographics, is I want to make sure that my children have all the resources that they need to be successful, whether it's in the arts or whether it's in sports or whether it's in academics. And I love the three big questions that change every teenager book, because it helps us drill down another layer to what kind of maybe the more pressing, obvious needs. You know, sometimes we hear that question about like the tyranny of the urgent versus the important. And the urgent is so easy to just get drowning in homework assignments and sports schedules and recitals and all that we don't create mental bandwidth or space to process some of these deeper soul questions that our kids are really wrestling with and through.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. And I find that to be true in my family and in the families that I talk to, that logistics kind of rule the day, you know?
Right.
I mean, what did I talk to as my kids were headed out the door this morning? You know, it was, did you grab your lunch? Did you, you know, do you have your soccer bag? Who's picking you up from school? I mean, you know, it's these logistics questions, and that's hard enough to stay on top of. And so to get a layer beneath that and have the space to listen to what's going on in my kid's life, and then to listen a layer below that as maybe what's going on beneath what's going on. That takes a kind of intentional space that we have to build in and kind of create, you know, room for in our lives. At the same time, it's what we're all longing for, you know? I mean, especially coming out of this season that we've been through, and in some ways that we're still in, with so much uncertainty and disruption. And what we're all looking for is connection, and to be understood and heard, and to know that we're okay. And I think for parents, you know, it's almost shifting into a different set of survival skills.
Yeah.
Where we really are helping our kids learn emotional resilience and relational resilience, and the kind of resilience that they're going to need in order to not just make it through this kind of ongoing uncertain time, but also into an uncertain future, which, you know, by all means, it will be uncertain. Maybe, hopefully not in all the same ways that it's uncertain right at this moment, but uncertainty is going to chase our kids down for their lives. We know that to be true as adults. And so I think it's a parenting skill that not a lot of us have trained in, to build that sense of resilience through uncertainty. And I think it starts by really listening for what our kids are experiencing and what kind of questions they're asking right now.
How have you and your family created space for those kind of primal questions to get asked and answered?
This is pretty basic,
Okay.
But really emphasizing eating meals together as much as we can.
Okay.
And I think family dinners can certainly be idolized. What I think is really important to capture is creating some kind of space for connection, and some kind of space where we leave the rest of the world outside of this moment in this space. So at our dinner table, we really try to hold to a no devices policy, that our devices are somewhere else while we're here at this table. And, certainly our family is in all different directions, like a lot of families. And one of the interesting things about pandemic life was we really were eating together every night at the table. And sure, that's not as true anymore. And we have to juggle a lot of different schedules. But those connection times, as much as we can have them, some kind of space where we're just checking in, where we're asking about our days. And I'll say a practice connected with that, Steve, is that as parents, we make sure we're sharing about our lives and our days and the questions that we're, wrestling with as well. That our kids hear us, on appropriate levels being vulnerable, that they hear us being real people with real lives and real frustrations. And I think that practice has been just grounding for us, prioritizing some level of connection. I'll say too, we also try to make space for play. We are not the best family at this, but I really think it's important creating these spaces for play, for laughter, for just some downtime, where we don't have to take ourselves too seriously, and we don't have to take all that we're wrestling with, so seriously all the time. There's a lot of science behind the healing of laughter and play. And when I tap into that as a parent, it is restorative.
Yeah. Brad, that's so helpful. When you talk about these questions, especially for parents who feel like maybe adolescence has created some distance between them and the child that had been, warm or cuddly or self-revelatory or accessible before, but whether it's honors classes or sports or dating, or somebody, gets a driver's license, which is a double-edged sword, right? Because we have less car time to process things. For parents who are maybe starting to feel that kind of the catch in their throat, or a little bit of panic, they're losing that connection with their kids. What recommendations do you have? Because the questions in the book are amazing, but I think some of us might misstep if we just try to sit down, face to face over coffee and then force them out of nowhere. If we need to do some bridge building or recreate an on-ramp, if that makes any sense.
It sure does. And you mentioned questions in the book. We included over 300 questions in the book, and one of the goals there was to help parents, to help increase our vocabulary and increase our toolbox of questions to ask. I don't know about you, but I tend to ask the same handful of questions to my kids over and over and over. Right. And that gets old for everybody, and it leads to not very satisfying answers because I'm asking not very good questions. And so, even for us, for Kara and I as authors, we need that toolkit of new questions, of new ways to engage our kids. And, similarly to your point, we all in new seasons need to find new ways to connect with our kids, and that's going to look different with different kids. Some people in my family connect around baseball and tracking with the Dodger baseball season. And that is a particular, thing to celebrate together or grieve together or laugh about together. And it becomes a connecting point. For each of my kids, it's something different. This is interesting too, because I think it's important between siblings. So 2 of my kids connect with one another around Marvel movies, and it's like their thing, just the 2 of them. And finding that thing can be really important, and it does look different from season to season. And so, parents have found movies are a good example, because we have talked to parents who've said, my kid won't open up about anything, but, if I take them to the movies, then they'll talk about that. Or, we have this particular show we watch together and we kind of keep up on this show. That creates a new conversation point. So, those connection points don't even have to be deep.
Right.
They can be surface. They can be something that's very straightforward. For some families, it's serving together in a particular kind of way, or it's connected to, there are so many things that it can be connected to, but that we find some way that we're connecting, reconnecting, learning to connect with our kids in different seasons. I mean, I've talked to parents who've learned to play video games that they aren't particularly interested in, but it's an inroad to connecting with and learning about, their kid and what their kid's interested in that season.
Yeah, and likewise, it could be a show that you as an adult might not have any particular aptitude for, but that's the sacrifice that you make to connect. If that's the only place where you could find common ground, then that's where we start.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I have the rest of my life, however long that will be, to do all the things that I like to do, or that my wife and I like to do. But this is a unique season to lean into what our kids are into. My son is into music, and one of the things that he did during the pandemic was he started creating music on his own, and it's electronic dance music. I have no interest in that music. However, I have found myself listening to it with him and listening to his music that he's creating, and because it's a connection point, it's something he's excited about, it's something that is giving him energy in life.
Yeah.
And and that helped us leading into this school year to know that it was so important to advocate for him, because he wanted to take a class at school that was a music production class, and it required talking with his counselors and making a change in his schedule and doing something that honestly we thought his other elective was the one we wanted him to take.
Sure.
But this was an elective that was really meaningful to him. And because we had paid attention and knew how important this was, we were able to, ourselves make that shift. And then also to advocate at school to say, hey, this is actually what he's really interested in. And those things, they might seem small or silly to us on some level, but it can be a real game changer for a kid to know that they were heard and seen, and that an adult acted on what they had heard and seen, especially when that adult is their parents. In this season, when there's already more, push away, and there's more kind of a natural developmental tendency to want to create space from your parents. And we need to not be afraid of that. We can't totally fight it, but we can also come alongside it and say, hey, I am going to give you more space, and I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention, and I'm here, and I'm still listening.
Right.
And I think that can offer so much stability to our kids in a season of instability.
That's so helpful. I know for me, sometimes on my worst days, I can see that need for space, that need for autonomy as rejection. And I have to fight to figure out, okay, there's a different, I just have to find a new way to lean in, because I think that sometimes the passive or the route of least resistance is, well, they're just going to go their way. I guess I'll go my way, and we'll check in on each other at graduation and holidays. And that's ultimately not what they're really asking for, and not ultimately what we as parents truly desire.
That's right. I mean, we've heard it say, you've got to fight for the relationship. And that is so true in adolescence, that we have to decide that we're going to give it energy, and even to fight against our own tendency to believe, when our teenagers brush it off, that that's something about us, that's something about our own failure. If we can normalize it while also keeping that door open.
Sure.
They may be actively pushing us away, but it doesn't mean that they actually need us to stay away.
That's a great line. Brad, talk a little bit about if you're going to give parents practical advice, what are a handful of questions that parents could use to start a conversation around any of those three topics: identity, belonging, and purpose?
I think one of the best phrases we can always put in our back pocket as parents is "tell me more." Tell me more. In fact, someone called those the three most loving words, because they invite curiosity, they invite detail. But what they also do is they help us press pause on our tendency to want to jump in with either judgment or fixing or answering questions or giving information, all the things that we can do so well as parents. Phrases like "tell me more" help create a bit of a pause. And so it's not even a question, it's a response. Well, tell me more about that, especially when we come up against something that we want to ask a lot of questions about because maybe we don't understand it or maybe we fear it. I think questions along those lines then that keep us open to make sure we're really hearing and understanding. So a question like, well, again, this isn't a proper question, but "help me understand" is another phrase. So there's some of those kind of general pieces. I think there's others that just invite curiosity, where that maybe begin with a phrase like "I wonder." I wonder what it's been like lately to be back in school for 8 hours a day, or I wonder what it's been like to be on that new team. I wonder how your friendships are going. I wonder what lunch looks like these days. Who are you eating with? What are your lunch conversations like? We can kind of open up and extend our curiosity to our kids, that we are interested in their actual lives. We're interested in their experience of their lives. And that can create a space for us to ask some of the more direct questions. I like to be really direct, and I have to remind myself that sometimes an indirect question is just way less threatening.
Right.
We have to remember that our kids, they can feel threatened by our directness, and they can feel like we're constantly trying to check in on them. So as another example, today, most of us as parents have access to our kids' grades at school through some kind of online system. I think that is another one of those double-edged swords. And in many ways, it can help parents feel like they're aware of, potential problems. But on the other hand, it feels to kids like intrusiveness. It feels like it creates more misunderstanding. My own kids have said, "I hate when you check in on my grades because I'm already looking, I know what's there, the teachers may have left something out, or,
Right.
I've already addressed it." I mean, we get these kinds of pushbacks. And if you bring something up, it's almost like an immediate, kids can feel like they're attacked.
Sure.
So what are some different inroads to ask about that? Like, I wonder what English class has been like lately, or how are you feeling about your English teacher? How'd you feel about that assignment that you turned in? There are other ways, or even just to say, "Hey, looking at this year or this next season, what's a good way for me to talk with you about your classes and your grades? What's helpful and what's unhelpful about the way that I ask you about school?" Even just giving them the opportunity to give us feedback could be a really powerful thing, because, well, it's that word, power. It empowers our kids. So anything that empowers them, anything that can empower them to help be part of a decision or part of a process, that can also be a really helpful question. So I'll pause there. You asked me about questions and I could probably go on for hours, but those are a few that come to mind.
No, I love that you talked about empowerment. And there was one section in the book where you said sometimes as fixers or as people who have more life experience, our temptation is say, well, just do this, just do this, just do this. It's not that hard. Just fill in the blank. Where in reality, sometimes the best gift is to ask a child. We've got a senior who's getting ready to start her college search journey. And I'm realizing that I'm always tempted to say, well, just do this. When in reality, one of the questions that you propose is, what's your plan? What's your approach for taking the next step in this journey?
Yeah, that's another really good one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that one. And I appreciate that one. Another section that really resonated with me was when you're talking with your children about where you feel like your spiritual paths or core beliefs might start to diverge. So I think a lot of parents, sometimes our knee jerk is panic when our children start asking questions about doubt, or depending on what the family kind of boundaries are, deciding maybe not to engage in family worship, or they opt not to go to youth group. And sometimes there's a grieving in that for certain parents. What tools have you found are helpful for moving the conversation forward in a way that's healthy, rather than kind of panic that leads to greater division?
Mm-hmm. It's a great example of where I think exploring for understanding is, needs to be our first step,
Right.
where the presenting situation might be a kid who says, well, I'm not going to church. And I think especially those of us who, we may have grown up with the answer of, of course you're going to church. Like, that may be kind of our knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, yes, you are.
Right.
That kind of response, or, anything from that family of responses, it can just tend to be counterproductive.
Right.
Because what we actually want is, actually, that's a good moment for us to step back and think about what we want. We want our kids to connect with church. We want our kids to connect with God, to know and follow Jesus. We can think about what our own hopes and values that are there, and what our fears are. Do we fear that our kids will walk away from God? So if we can think about that, then we can ask a different kind of question. Tell me more about what's bothering you about church, or, I wonder what makes you not want to go. And, that might lead to some more helpful information. Again, kind of a help me understand kind of approach. And then I think we can wonder about, well, what would it look like if we try some things? So we could go the route of experimenting and encouraging, like, well, what if you try, instead of this, we try that? Or what if you go to youth group, that whatever it is that the kid is saying they don't want to do, that we give them some alternatives or some things to try, or to say, what if this, and then we'll talk about that, as opposed to just kind of a flat no. Another route is a relational route, to wonder with them, I wonder if there's an adult at church you trust to talk to, who you could kind of talk this out with. You're not feeling very welcome at youth group. Who could we talk with about that? Or
Right.
Worship is kind of boring. I wonder if, who could we talk to about that? When it comes to doubts specifically, if our kids are saying, I don't believe any of this anymore, or, I'm not really sure I could be a Christian, I think it's really important for us to not freak out in that moment, but to help affirm that questions are really part of the faith formation process.
Yeah.
And that doubting isn't necessarily a sign of losing faith. It's a sign of forming faith. And that we can take those opportunities to affirm for our kids, even to say something like, I've had questions about my faith too, or I remember going through a season of doubting, and here's what helped me. Here's a practice that's been really helpful for me, or it really helped me to talk with somebody, or whatever kind of response we can give that helps to normalize that experience. Quite honestly, even to say to our kids, I think it's more honest to say to our kids, yeah, I've had times when I felt like I didn't really want to go to church either. And here's why, or here's what helped. That kind of honesty can just open up more space for us to let it be a conversation.
Right.
Also to remind our kids, and maybe, sometimes they don't want to go to church because they feel like they really aren't heard or seen, or their voice doesn't matter there. So it can also be reinforcing, hey, the church needs you. Right. And if there's things you don't like about the church that you want the church to change, if you walk away, the church isn't going to change. If we can figure out a way you can stay engaged but have a voice, then maybe you could actually be part of change.
Great. Thank you so much. Brad, any closing thoughts or encouragements that you would have for parents who are trying to either kind of go to a next level of authenticity with their teenagers, or trying to jumpstart that conversation?
You are the parent your kid needs.
Okay.
I think we all need that reminder. I need that reminder. I think God has put us in our kids' lives. God has put our kids in our lives, not by accident, but because God wants to do something through those relationships. And to be reminded that we are enough of a parent. With these 3 questions, Steve, we have really tried to wrestle theologically with how we want young people to explore and journey towards Christ-centered answers. And when it comes to that question of who am I, that question of identity, we believe that every kid needs to know they're enough, that because of Jesus, they're enough, that because of God's grace, they're enough, that because they're made in God's image. And I think we need that own sense as parents that we too are enough, and we are enough of a parent that our kids need, that God has made us good enough to be the kind of parents who our kids need us to be in this season. That doesn't mean we don't need support. It doesn't mean we sometimes don't need outside help, but it also means that, we haven't been given an impossible job, and that God certainly doesn't want us to give up on ourselves, even in the days when we feel like we really blow it as parents and make big mistakes. That we are the parent, we're still the parent that our kids need, and that we're not alone in it.
Thanks so much, Brad. I really appreciate that. Again, the book is 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager, Making the Most of Our Conversations and Connections. You can find it online. You can get it here in Grand Rapids at Baker Bookhouse. And it's one that I've read. It's formed and shaped Kelly and my parenting, and I know it'll be an encouragement to the rest of you as well. So this has been Hope Through the Hard Stuff. Thanks, Brad, for joining us, and thanks to everyone who's listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to Hope Through the Hard Stuff. If you liked what you heard, please remember to subscribe to it, rate and review it, and then share it with others. Winning at Home offers hope through counseling and coaching, motivational speaking, community events, and other media resources. If you believe in what we do and want to support us in our mission, consider making a donation at winningathome.com.